You know, this isn't just the story of a pharaoh who got a crown. It's the story of a boy who inherited an absolute crisis. We're talking a kingdom literally torn in two, a nation under occupation, and a family legacy just defined by tragedy and defeat. So today, let's get into the incredible rise of Ahmose I, the guy who founded Egypt's legendary New Kingdom.
It's a huge question, one that leaders have faced all through history. But what if you're just a kid? And what if half your country is run by a foreign power that's been dug in for almost 100 years? I mean, where would you even start? For young Moses, this wasn't some thought experiment. This was his life.
And for Ahmose, this wasn't really a choice, was it? It was his destiny. This war against the occupiers had already taken his father and his brother. Winning meant everything. It meant unifying Egypt and building an empire. But losing, well, that meant the end of his entire dynasty and his people's freedom. So to really get a handle on how Ahmose built an entire empire, we first have to understand the chaos he was born into. This was a time called the Second Intermediate Period, which is really just a fancy way of saying Egypt wasn't one country at all. It was more like a patchwork of warring territories. Okay, so the main challenge came from a group called the Hyksos. These were rulers who came from Western Asia, and they had set up this incredibly powerful kingdom in Lower Egypt. From their capital city, Avaris, they basically controlled the whole Nile Delta. All the fertile land, all the crucial trade routes, they had a stranglehold on the nation's wealth. So picture this. Up in the north, you have the heavily fortified Hyksos kingdom. And way down south, you have the native Egyptian dynasty, clinging to power from their capital in Thebes. This was Ahmose's world, a country literally cut in half, with his family leading the resistance from the south. And for Ahmose's family, this fight was deeply, deeply personal. His father, Pharaoh II Tau, was the one who started the rebellion, and he was killed in action. In fact, his mummy shows these absolutely horrific battle wounds. Then his older brother, Ahmose, took up the fight, but he died after only 3 years on the throne. This war had taken a terrible toll on the royal family. So after all that tragedy, all that loss, the fate of Egypt didn't fall to some hardened general or a wise old politician. Nope, it fell right onto the shoulders of a child. He was just 10 years old. Think about that. At an age when most of us are just starting to figure out the world, Ahmose was made king of a fractured nation that was in the middle of a brutal war. The pressure must have been just unbelievable. But luckily for him, and for Egypt, he wasn't totally alone. His mother, the incredible Queen Ahotep, stepped in to rule as his regent. And she was no placeholder, let me tell you. She was a force. She governed, she held the kingdom together, she rallied support, and she basically got everything ready for the final war, all while waiting for Ahmose to be old enough to lead. And when Ahmose finally came of age, he didn't just restart the war his father had begun, he finished it. This was the campaign that would make him a legend and completely change the future of Egypt. And his strategy? It was brilliant. He didn't just charge headfirst at the Hyksos capital. No, this was a patient, methodical plan. First, he took the key border fort of Charu to cut Avaris off from its allies and supply lines. Then he went south to crush a rebellion in his own backyard to make sure no one could stab him in the back. Only then, once everything was secure, did he launch the final assault on Avaris itself. And the coolest part? We know these incredible details because someone who was actually there wrote it all down. A soldier who served under the king, who, funnily enough, was also named Ahmose, had the major battles of the war carved right into the walls of his tomb. It's a real, eyewitness account of the war to reunify Egypt. But victory didn't stop at Avaris. Ahmose chased the Hyksos all the way into Canaan and laid siege to their last fortress, Sharohen, for 3 long years. After that, he marched his armies south into Nubia to put down rebellions and re-establish Egyptian control. See, he wasn't just winning a war, he was building an empire with secure borders. So, with Egypt finally whole again and its borders locked down, Ahmose switched gears. He went from conqueror to builder, and his work in peacetime would turn out to be just as revolutionary as his victories in war. I mean, the sheer scale of what he accomplished is just staggering. He completely overhauled the government. He jump-started the economy by reopening quarries, mines, and trade routes that had been dormant for years. He kicked off massive construction projects. He made his hometown of Thebes the capital of everything, politics and religion. And he elevated its local god Amun to become the main god of the entire nation. This was the beginning of the mighty 18th dynasty.
And that's why he is such a big deal. Ahmose isn't just another name on a long list of pharaohs. He's the father of the new kingdom, Egypt's golden age. All those famous names that came after him, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, even Tutankhamun, they all built their legacy on the powerful empire that Ahmose created. But the story isn't quite over. For all his world-changing achievements, the final chapter of Ahmose's life is, well, it's pretty much a mystery. So get this, Ahmose built his final resting place at Abydos, and at its center he built a pyramid. But this wasn't just any pyramid. It turned out to be the very last one ever built for a native Egyptian pharaoh. He was the end of a tradition that had lasted for more than 1,000 years. So you have to ask, why the sudden change? Why would they just abandon the most iconic structures in the world? Well, the answer seems to be a mix of two things, security and religion. Pyramids were basically giant advertisements for tomb robbers. But also, the main god of the new kingdom was Amun, whose name literally meant the hidden one. So hiding the pharaoh's tomb in a secret valley suddenly became the new sacred thing to do. So what about Ahmose himself? Well, his mummy was finally found in 1881, not in his pyramid, but hidden away in a secret stash of royal mummies. Turns out, ancient priests had moved them all to try and keep them safe, but sadly, the robbers had already gotten to him. His head had been broken off, and his nose was smashed in. The Egyptologist who unwrapped him, gassed him as Pharaoh, was the first person to see his face in over 3,000 years. He left us this really vivid description, and even said he looked a lot like his father, Seqenen-Re-Tau. So for about a century, everyone just assumed we were looking at the face of Egypt's great unifier. But what if it isn't? In the last few decades, a pretty shocking controversy has popped up, and it calls the entire identity of this mummy into question. Yeah, modern science came along and threw a huge wrench in the whole thing. X-rays have revealed that the skull's shape is actually really different from his known family members. That family resemblance Pharaoh saw, turns out it might have only been skin deep. So today, the true identity of the mummy we call Ahmose I is a genuine mystery. So we're left with this final puzzle. The guy was a unifier, a builder, the founder of an empire, and now a mystery. After everything he accomplished, we might not even know what he really looked like. It really makes you wonder, right? What other secrets from this incredible moment in history are still waiting to be discovered?